Hello everyone, my name is Sam Spade and welcome to another Coding Fundamentals in GML tutorial. In this tutorial, we'll be talking about object inheritance. Inheritance in GameMaker Studio 2 is the way we base one object on another object. It allows us to create sort of classes or types, and it allows you to pass along code. So in other words, object B can inherit code from object A, and any changes to object A will then affect object B. And this can be extremely useful, as we'll see in an example. One thing to note is that GameMaker Studio 2 does not allow multiple inheritance. So any given object can only have one parent, but you can go multiple levels deep. So object A can be the parent of object B, which can be the parent of object C, which can be the parent of object D, and so on. And an object can have multiple children. So object A can be the parent of objects B, C, and D. So there are four key ideas about inheritance that I want to pass along. The first is the idea of using inheritance and parentage to create classes or types. And I keep saying classes or types because those words can have specific meanings in other programming languages. And here I'm trying to use it more as we would in normal English. It's just a class or a type of a thing. So inheritance allows you to create classes or types. Objects can also inherit code and override their parents' code and add to their parents' code. And those are the other three things that we want to talk about. So types, inheriting, overriding, and adding to code. So first let's talk about using inheritance to make classes or types in GameMaker Studio 2. So many functions that take an object ID will automatically check children and children of children all the way down the line. What this means is that with inheritance, you can use a single object ID and check multiple different types of objects. Inheritance can be used with a with statement to check multiple different objects. When you use an object ID with, I think, all of the collision functions and the collision event, it will check all children of that object, and instance number will count children as well. There might even be more than these, but these are the ones that I use and see used most frequently. But as we said, not only can you create classes or types with inheritance, you can also inherit code. And there's a couple rules to keep in mind when doing this. Objects inherit events by default. If you create the same event in a child object, you will override the parent's event by default. So if object A has a step event and object B is a child of object A, by default, object B will get object A's step event. But if you create a step event in object B, by default, you've overridden object A's step event, and now that code won't affect object B at all. If you want to bring that back in, you use the built-in GameMaker function, event inherited, and you can then also write your own code in that step event, an object B step event, allowing you to add additional functionality. And importantly, you can also choose when to inherit object A step event. So object B could do something and then inherit the step event, or inherit the step event and then do something. Here we can see a simple diagram that corresponds to the example code we're going to show in a moment. We're going to have a button class. It's going to have two children, one click button and one release button. Release button will have a child called do Z, and click button will have two children, do X and do Y. So the primary button parent will have a step event, which will simply highlight the button if our mouse is hovering over it. That step event will be carried through all of the children. So do X, do Y, and do Z will all get the step event from the button parent. And then click button and release button will each have their own input check and then event user 0. And each of these buttons will also have an event user 0, so we can see how you can override or modify parents' events. Okay, let's switch over to GameMaker Studio 2 and see this in action. So here we have our button parent. You can see it does not have any object as its parent, but it does have two children, and you can click on this and see that these objects also have children, and you can see that it has a single step event. This step event simply checks for a position meeting with the mouse, and if there is, it'll use image index 1, and if not, it'll use image index 2. Note that this is going to work even though there's no sprite attached to button parent. There's no sprite and no mask, but this code is still going to work because there's not going to be any instance of button parent in our code. We're simply going to have these three buttons. So we have the two children, click button parent and release button parent. They're pretty much the same, except that click button parent has a left press event, which will run event user 0. And the release button parent has a left release event, which will run event user 0. Click button parent also has event user 0, which just says mouse button clicked. And the release button parent has an event user 0, which says mouse button released. And now you'll notice that the click button parent has two children, object do X, object do Y, and the release button parent has only one child, object do Z. Do X is blue, do Y is purple, do Z is orange. These three objects each just have a single user event. User event do X, user event do Y, user event do Z. These are all user event 0. So you can see that they're overriding their parent's event. And in fact, I probably should have mentioned this before, but you can actually see the events get inherited. Here you can see that it is inheriting the step event from button parent and the left press event from click button parent, whereas this one is inheriting the step event from button parent and the left released event from release button parent. And you can see that it's overriding. This is the symbol GameMaker shows there is a parent event and that we have overridden it by creating our own. And if we go into these, we can see that object do X is going to inherit its parent's event before running its own show message. Object do Y is going to run its message and then inherit, and object Z is not going to inherit at all. So we run it in the debugger, and as you can see, there's only 3 instances active in our room: object X, object Y, or object do X, object do Y, and object do Z. None of the parents actually exist, but you can see that when we hover our mouse over any of these buttons, they change color because they're each inheriting 2-up button parent step event. And now if we click on object do X, we get mouse button clicked. This is event user 0 for click button parent, and then its own user event, X is done. If we come over here, click on Y, we get Y is done, and then mouse button clicked, because remember that for X, we inherit and then we show message. And for Y, we show message and then we inherit, and both are valid and will work. And then if we click on do Z, it just says Z is done, and there's no other message because we're not inheriting anything. We're simply overriding release button parents event user 0. So it could say mouse button released, but we've overridden that. If we wanted to add that back in, we could come in here. We could type event inherited and rerun the program. So I've rerun it, and now when we click, it says mouse button released and Z is done because we added that code back in. We added event inherited, the function, the built-in function event inherited, back into our event. And so now we're inheriting it. Before we go back to the slides, I want to show why inheritance is so powerful. Let's say that all of a sudden we don't like how this is organized. And what we would rather do is we would rather say, you know what, do X, we want your parent to be release button. And in fact, click button, we don't even want you to be click button. We would rather have you be a tap button. So we'll change this event to change event gesture tap. So now Y is a child of tap button, and all this is changed automatically. X is a child of release button. Let's just move this down here. This is unnecessary, by the way. Over here, you don't need to order your resource tree like this, but I generally do it just to keep in mind how everything is structured. And so now release button has 2 children, do X and do Z, and tap button, which used to be click button, now has only 1 child, which is do Y. And we can rerun this and see how it changes. So now if we come over here, do X is a child of release button. So mouse button released, X is done. So we just changed how this button works simply by changing who its parent is. And this button, now if I click and hold for a while and then release, nothing will happen. But if we tap it, which is a click and then quick release, Y is done, mouse button clicked. I forgot to change that code. This is now a tap. But as you can see, we've just changed how these buttons work by just switching a few things around. And this is incredibly powerful. So the last thing I want to talk about is object index and ancestors. Object index is a built-in GameMaker keyword that will give you the object ID of that instance. When used in connection with the function object is ancestor, you can determine whether a specific instance has a specific parent. You can see examples of this in the manual, but if you're ever wondering how to go from a specific object or a specific instance of an object, to say it more correctly, and find out whether another object is that object's parent, this is how you would do it. In summary, inheritance allows you to create groups of objects, sort of a class or of a type. And objects can inherit, modify, or add to inherited code. And this is an incredibly powerful way to refer to many different instances at once, reuse code, and make things easy to modify and maintain. As always, the links in this slide will be below, and I want to call special attention to the last one. Gloomy Toad Studios has a great video on inheritance as well. It's about 15 minutes long and covers everything we just talked about, but with some slightly different examples. And so if anything in this video is unclear, I would recommend watching that one as well as another resource. Links to the source code and the slides are below as well. And that's it. Thanks for watching.